Hello everyone, I'm Amel Bourdoucen, a doctoral candidate at Aalto University in Finland. On behalf of myself and my co-author Janne Lindqvist, I am happy to present our work today. So we know from prior work that users often feel confused or frustrated when handling the privacy settings or configurations of different apps. But what is specific to default apps that are part of an ecosystem? In short, default apps are sticky, meaning that they are difficult to remove or uninstall without risking compromising the overall security of the device, either by jailbreaking or rooting. The privacy configurations of these default apps are prompted to users only once, during device setup, making it less likely for users to go back and change the settings later on. Additionally, not all default apps are presented as part of the setup process, only a selected few. In a nutshell, this work has found that there is a major gap between the information supplemented to users and what users actually understand about how the system works. To navigate the specific issues to default apps, we have the following research questions. In the first research question, we explore what privacy configurations are available to control default apps. Secondly, how can users control the privacy configurations of default apps? Thirdly, how do users understand privacy configurations and their privacy and security implications? Finally, how does setting up default features impact the privacy of users? This work took place in the form of two studies, both critically important to answer our questions. The first study evaluated the privacy configurations of 8 default apps, part of Apple's mobile ecosystem. To conduct the first study, we analyzed the official sources presented to users. Secondly, we performed a system navigation where we captured the setup and usage processes on iOS and macOS devices. Finally, we mapped the privacy configurations responsible for handling personal information for each app and highlighted the pathways for every privacy control. If you are interested to read more, scan the QR code in the slide to view the full tables of privacy configurations. To capture users' understanding of the privacy configurations of default apps, we conducted a qualitative study. We published an online screening survey between May and June of 2021 and received a total of 67 responses. We selected adult Apple users located in Finland and used at least 3 default apps. We invited the selected participants to remote interviews conducted for 60 to 90 minutes using their own devices. Topics of the interview questions were about the setup process, storage of personal information, synchronization and information between devices, and the ability to disable information sharing on default apps. Some of the challenges we faced when conducting the first study were the closed nature of the ecosystem, meaning the lack of disclosure for some specifications about the processing of personal data. Secondly, the scattered information. When reading the privacy policy of Apple, we discovered that the controls for some apps were described in other apps, and some controls were not even mentioned. We repeated the study in 2022 and observed that the issues we previously noted in 2020 remained in the second version of the study. We found that all settings are not clearly documented or are misleading. Apple does not list all the privacy configurations required to turn off or disable a feature from functioning. This resulted in an unknown number of actions required to completely disable data sharing. Even if users do follow the descriptions provided about disabling features of default apps, users receive no confirmation about the previous data they disabled with the app, nor are they notified whether their data is deleted or stored for longer periods. The different stages of the device setup process often contain hidden information that is not evident to users. The user starts by turning on the device for the first time and navigating through the setup wizard for privacy options like sharing analytics with Apple, signing the terms and conditions, and setting up Touch ID. Several of these options might only be seen once by the user during the setup process and can only be modified later in the system settings. Participants expressed that they knew they were being tracked while using default apps, saying that tracking is useful sometimes, but also invading, such that, in certain situations, tracking can be useful for finding lost devices, otherwise invading if one wants to be left alone. Participants were aware that data sharing was not completely disabled and that personal data was not completely deleted from default apps. Participants shared concerns that it is challenging and nearly impossible to validate whether their data is not shared anymore with the mobile ecosystem. The study participants believed that the configurations of default apps are not organized clearly, making them difficult to find to reconfigure later on. Participants also demanded to know what happens to their information. They wanted to know what privacy configurations were enabled by default and the user data stored and collected as a result. Participants were surprised that the privacy configurations they adjusted did not match what they really wanted. They felt the same way when learning that a small subset of voice requests may be kept for up to 2 years, as Apple states. The reason for the data retention was not clear. Family Sharing app enabled members to share their location, purchases, and other useful things. However, participants believe that the app may also introduce distrust in families and relationships because of the monitoring aspect of the app. In the second part of the interviews, we verified users' knowledge of privacy configurations of different default apps by asking them to do practical tasks on their devices. We collected users' answers while doing the tasks. All participants were unaware how to disable data sharing, and they were not sure what different settings did or how the mobile ecosystem worked. We examined the different routes that participants took to complete the tasks. We found that most participants started with OS settings first to disable default apps. Alternatively, they resorted to online help like Google or Siri, but did not seek Apple's official documentation at any point. Participants generally did not use Apple ID or cloud settings to attempt the tasks. They were generally confused about what disabling the cloud meant about the function of the app. Participants also generally gave up after 1 or 2 attempts at a given task and were unaware whether they succeeded at the task or not. Here are some key takeaways of the results of both studies as we are approaching the end of the presentation. For the first study, we found that all settings are not clearly documented and are not clear to follow. There are unknown number of actions required to completely disable data sharing. Data handling practices are not disclosed to users. As for the second study, we found that participants struggled to find different privacy settings and were not sure how their data is handled. Participants did not turn to Apple's privacy policies for instructions on how to modify the different privacy controls of default apps. Participants were aware that they were being tracked and that data sharing on apps is not completely disabled. We present recommendations for solving issues with default apps. Despite the time between the repetition of the study, the issues we discovered persisted in the latest updates. Our findings indicate that the users turn to Central OS settings as the first choice when attempting to modify privacy settings. We suggest shifting the privacy configurations to Central OS settings to make it easier for users to navigate these settings. The lack of clarity of instructions was revealed in this study through challenges in allocating and understanding data practices in the mobile ecosystem. This leads to the third point, that the privacy configurations were found in the privacy policies, which are often filled with legal jargon and ignored by users. We recommend vendors not rely on privacy policies to include data on how users configure default apps. Currently, the default apps fail to notify users of what happens when disabling certain features of default apps. Notifications or pop-ups are much more needed to alert users of what happens to their data after disabling a feature. We thank you very much for your time. Please contact us if you have any questions about our work, and make sure to check out our paper for more details.